Those are some ways when you talk to people to assess whether you know, how stressful it was. But when we talk to people, we usually ask them, how frightened were you? Tell me about that. And when I interviewed him and evaluated him, he described very clearly the symptoms that we listened to about fear, helplessness, and horror, and symptoms of what he experienced at the time.
Who did?
Officer Slager.
But none of the signs and symptoms of critical stress?
No, in my evaluation with him, he did describe them.
Because
yes.
that confuses me, because he was also asked that specifically today, wasn't he?
Yes.
And his answer, when I am at work, I'm immune from anger. I'm immune from emotion. I am immune from stress.
Yeah.
He was being dishonest?
No. No, people are different. His personality profile, when we tested him, is completely consistent with what we see in military officers and police officers. He's low on emotional expression and reactivity, and which means he's not a high emotional responder, and he's more like Mr. Spock than somebody else. He likes to be logical, meticulous, think through things.
Logical. I'm sorry.
And
meticulous?
Yes, and his profile was valid. He's not an impulsive person.
Not impulsive. Okay.
No, he's in no way, shape, or form on his psychological testing someone who appears someone who's emotionally impulsive or a hothead. As a matter of fact, the dilemma if someone's in a relationship with him is trying to figure out how are they feeling. A very common complaint from military wives to their husbands, they go, what do you don't even care about my feelings? And they go, well, they don't matter. I mean, we just need to do this. They often are very logical people about how to pursue things.
Okay. If we could, I'm sorry, this is one of those points we sort of referenced earlier. If I could just ask questions and have you respond to the questions that are being asked, if that's okay.
All right.
Again, I mean no offense by that. Thank you.
None taken.
You mentioned in your direct, isn't it true, that people, if in fact they have reached this critical level of stress, react in habitual and reflective ways?
Reflexive. We call it either resorting to habit or training or what you've done before.
Let me stop you if I could.
Yeah.
Habitual means arising from habit, correct?
Yes, it's kind of a tautology, yeah.
And habit is something done very frequently.
It's something you practice over and over. You want that behavior to be automatic.
Not something you do once a year. Something that's automatic, that's done and repeated.
Well, for stress inoculation, once a year is not going to do it.
Exactly.
For behavior, you only do once a year. Yeah, it might not become a habit.
In the situation of the draw and shoot, if one side were to take great pains to convince all of us that draw and shoot was done one time a year, we wouldn't call that a habit, would we?
It depends what they did one time a year.
It sounded to me like you were just saying one time a year wasn't enough to be a habit.
It's not enough for stress inoculation, no.
Right.
But some things you can practice and you can get the skill down. So you really want to know how often they did the behavior, how often they rehearsed it, whether it's a habit or not. I mean, there's a continuum of habit behavior. Some things are done since you're 5, 10, 15, or 20. Other things...
typically speaking...
Yeah, I mean, it's with firearms.
If I smoked one cigarette a year, one would not say I was a habitual smoker, would they?
I wouldn't myself,
okay,
no.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Right. One would not say that I was a reflexive smoker if I smoked one cigarette a year, would they?
If you only did it when you were deployed, it might say that. But no.
Okay,
yeah.
Fair enough. A once a year thing, not a habitual reflexive response, typically.
Yeah, I mean, most training is designed to get habitual behavior, but the more you do it, the better.
And speaking of, when this critical level of stress, the sympathetic nervous system, same thing, or is triggered. There are other studies too about the process of shooting, right? And what do those studies show about shooting while under this critical level of stress that we're describing?
Well, most studies about shooting that are controlled are not in the range of stress as my studies, because the scenarios aren't as life-threatening. People really can die at SEER school, and they do at times. People really do get shot in the close quarters battle training. They do use live ammunition, and we've had some casualties. So most training that people do is not at that level. that I get to study and work with when I'm working with the military units. But you're still hoping.
There have been studies done attempting to link these high-level stress
Yes.
shooting competency.
And
what do those studies reflect?
In general, the more you do things, the more stable the behavior comes, and the more used to that situation you become. And the idea is that you should be less confused when you find yourself under that circumstance.
I don't believe you answered the question I was directly asking. I'll rephrase it.
Well, you have to tell me which specific study, because there's so many on stress inoculation. But in general, when we look at the field, the more you do something, usually the better you are at it, and the more likely it is that that behavior will show up under stress.
How about rephrase it?
Yeah.
These critical stress levels you've been describing have calamitous effects on the vision, the fine motor skills. So thus, vision and motor skills being a key aspect of shooting, when a person is under these levels of stress, if they are in fact under these levels of stress, you expect their shooting competency to go down, not poor work, not
it
better.
can. Yes, it can. Yeah.
And so you wouldn't expect a person truly under in these stress levels you've been describing to be a very technical shot.
Well, no, we look for that in the people we select. I mean, that's exactly what we do want.
Military,
Well, they're
highly trained people, but
they can be
idea
military.
is the training stinks.
I can't judge that. But I would say that whether it's law enforcement or military or civilian, if you've done that, you expect to see the good behavior, what you're looking for. I mean, that's what we count on for soldiers, sailors, and Marines to do under fire, because the joke is the best plans go out the window the minute shooting starts. So you hope for that under stress with this part of your brain gone, that what's kicking in is your policy behavior, your SOP, what your standard of practice, what you've been practicing. That's generally the idea in the military about an SOP. In most programs, that's why they train you. They want you to resort to what the best practice is. That's what we do in medicine. But I can't judge the North Carolina system. It's not for me to say.
Now, in most of the testing, we haven't really talked about this, but most of your testing was done, a lot of it in survival school?
No, it's been the most famous research, especially on eyewitness memory, has been at survival school, because we had the opportunity to look at eyewitness for faces, which is what your brain does the best. And what we find is that only 30 to 50% of people are correct at identifying their interrogator. So the reason why those data have been more widely known in legal and psych circles is I was just fortunate. I had an opportunity to start research in a place that no one was allowed to do research before, and by default I have data in thousands of people on their memory. It's I don't think it's a statement about me. It was an opportunity that I had, and we did that. So a number of the studies that people know are SEER, but it's
really
been...
not trying to get it. My question was, so you did a lot of your studies in survival school?
I've done a lot, yes,
Okay.
and other places.
Thank you.
But,
That's
sorry.
And you mentioned this, that was done mainly on facial recognition?
We used ear witness memory, eyewitness memory, spatial memory, temporal memory, descriptive memory for clothing, for glasses, for phones, for weapons.
Misinformation study.
Well, so if you read that paper carefully, one section is all without misinformation, just looking at the accuracy of the memory for those things, so that we could compare when we tried to tinker with someone's memory, how much more would it be off. But if you look at the section where we didn't do anything to affect someone's memory, 50% of them are just wrong in their eyewitness identification.
In things like, you asked some questions like about insignias on uniforms?
No, actually the total color of the uniform and the boards, which military people know.
Yeah.
In that training program, they're trained if you're ever a captive, you need to know what the enemy looks like, so when you're debriefed, we can collect intelligence. 100% of them are wrong when we do misinformation. When we don't give them misinformation, only 10 to 20% will give an answer. They're still wrong. It's just that in that paper, we were saying if we give them false information, we can make 100% of the people wrong.
And misinformation is important, right? It's an important thing to consider when hearing testimony.
It's important when you're questioning people about their memory.
So misinformation can there's a larger risk for misinformation over time, filling gaps in memory. That's correct?
I would say in general, you've increased the opportunity for people to get exposed to information after an event. We call it post-event information. And so you're increasing the chance for some misinformation to creep into someone's memory when they learn about something later. Yeah.
So you've testified that memories right after an event can be problematic because of the high stress levels.
Yes.
Memories far after an event can be problematic because of the potential for misinformation.
Yes.
You haven't really suggested what the studies show when you're getting information. And what do some studies show about that?
In studies that are low stress, the data support getting the memory as early as possible, as soon as possible. I know there's currently a debate in the law enforcement field about should you make people wait to debrief them or not. In my field, we tend to think of it as it's probably better to try and just document and collect memory as early as possible. So as you go along, and maybe a person mentions new things, you can at least consider where did that new information come from. They may have just neglected to mention it early on. They may have somehow heard it, picked it up, or assumed it later on. And so our recommendation right now is that you just try and document every time you interview someone so that you can begin to think about it. But the fact that they mentioned one thing at this time and this time doesn't tell me what's going on with them. It's just that we know that memory isn't reliable. It changes when you assess it at different time points. But that doesn't tell us which memory's valid. Does that
what
make
about
sense?
The role of an REM cycle on the ability to recall those?
Normally, if you're getting your REM sleep, your rapid eye movement sleep, we think that that's a way that your brain basically dumps erroneous, or I wouldn't say erroneous, I should say, dumps information it doesn't need, and that REM sleep is related to the consolidation of memory over time, trying to get it to turn into long-term memory. The fancy term is called long-term potentiation, or LTP. It doesn't only happen in REM sleep, but we know that REM sleep is important to that process, but we don't yet know exactly how it's important to it. So that's still an active area of study. We generally think getting some sleep is good, but then we also know if we wait too long, there's an opportunity for people to begin trying to figure out what happened. So,
because people do that, don't they?
We are
trying to figure out what happened, often in ways that benefit them, self-serving ways.
Well,
Certainly you would know that, correct?
that can be one of the reasons. I think, but at core, people are we're meaning-making animals. We try and sort stuff out automatically. It's kind of part of what your brain does.
Are you familiar with, or could you comment on the common law enforcement policy in a police shooting to do a brief interview as soon as possible, and then 3 days?
Yeah.
Wait 3 days, and is that sort of motivated by this REM concept? Give the 3 days to calm down, let the memory go through the cycles?
I'll probably annoy someone with my comment. That's what's being marketed.
Okay.
Scientifically, we don't have the evidence to support that training as or that procedure as the best way to acquire memory. But it is something that's popular in the United States. It just doesn't have all the scientific data behind it. So it might be the right way to go, but it may really not be the way to go.
Well, you said doing it right after might not be the right way. Doing it 3 days later might not be the right way. Doing it a year and a half later might not be the right way.
Well, no, we know there's risks in all of it, but we do know from animals, non-human animal studies, and from human studies that everybody is in agreement you should start early to get it, because features of memory do fade pretty quickly. That we do know. But there is a debate about should you wait 2 days, should you wait 3 days? And I was asked to evaluate one of those programs at the university the other day for the government, and I just said, we don't know. So I couldn't recommend it. I could say it's something people do, but we don't know for sure if that's the best way of doing it.
And again, you've said that over time, I believe in your direct, your quote was, you know, if you don't get that soon in that 3 days as to the truth, I believe the quote was, people will end up inventing one. Was that your quote on?
Yeah, what I meant to say is that our brain's a little like a washing machine. If there's no clothes in it and you push the button, it'll spin. We like to figure things out, and most trauma victims I've interviewed and in the research I've done, people are used to remembering what happens to them. And it's just a really natural process as they try and sort out, so what happened? And you usually try and talk to a friend or a family member or someone else to sort out your experience. It's just very natural. And that's what I mean by that. We're meaning-making animals. We want to put it together. And why that's related to memory is that, I said earlier, memory isn't like a camera. Your memory really works like there's a backroom editor that puts things in the order that seem to make the most sense. And that doesn't please everybody, but that's what we know that your memory does.
It makes the most sense and also casts the individual in the best light often, right?
Not always, but it can. It can be to cast them in the light, or not always.
Let's segue that into some of your studies. In the survival school study, you take pains to make sure every one of your participants knows that how they do on your study is not going to affect their graded performance in the school.
Yes.
And is the purpose of that because you don't want to inject into any sort of study any sort of motivation to be dishonest or to lie?
It's twofold. One, it's according to U.S. law. In human studies, there cannot be coercion. And the idea when you're studying active duty military people or prisoners, these are special populations, and we have to make sure they understand there is no pressure from the command to participate, because that would be coercive and that would be unfair. It's sort of like as a professor, I don't ask my own students to be in my research because we tend to think they might have a hard time saying no because they think maybe they'll get a better grade. The same is true for the military. So in all the papers, we stress that because early on with our ethics committee, we had to talk about that and say, how do we ensure that people are doing this of their own free will, that they really do believe they don't have to let me collect spit and blood and do all this. So that's why those statements are in there, because we take great pains to let them know, I'm not part of your military, I am not in your chain of command, you will not benefit in any way, shape, or form from doing this. Yeah.
That's important, right?
It's,
that all participants know that.
It is, it's the law.
Even injecting something as silly as, we're going to ask you a question, the answer is either A or B. Be honest, answer which one you think, but by the way, I'll give you $10 if you answer B. That renders that study pretty meaningless, doesn't it?
We wouldn't do that, right? Yeah, right? No, you wouldn't want to do that.
So certainly trying to protect yourself from criminal charges, you would acknowledge is an almost unimaginable motive to be dishonest. Is that not correct?
That can always be a factor in a criminal case. I mean, yeah.
Are you familiar with Arian Mack, a psychologist in your field? Does a lot of the same stuff?
You had mentioned the study. It's not John Mack, it's Arian Mack. Where is he?
Gosh, I'm sorry. Take 10 minutes and find
name
out.
the study. Remind me of the study. I don't remember everyone. But
all I know of him, to be honest with you, I'm trying to make him sound smart. I'm not. All I know of him is that he sort of coined the phrase inattentional blindness that sort of has a lot of carryover in the field.
Yes.
If I could offer you a quote by him, just get your response to the jury.
Okay.
This is in relation to his studies in similar fields being used in this manner. I hate the fact that it's being used in this way. When we work in a lab, we ask them if they saw something. They have no motivation to lie. A police officer involved in a shooting certainly has a reason to lie. But what's sort of your take on that? What's your comment on that?
Well, in a science paper, that's not data. That is an opinion. And I think that he raises an important question for other scientists, if we're reading the paper, to say, we do need to think about the data we collect and how it is similar and how it is different from real-world circumstances. So I couldn't say more about it other than that it's always that's a good question to ask and say, in what ways does the data that I collect here and from what I do here help me understand something in the real world? And to acknowledge there are differences, there always are in science studies. The ways we tend to make most sense is we ask the question, If what I find is consistent with what we've seen in non-human animals, then I see it in the laboratory, then I see it in something that's closer to the real world, and it also sounds something like real victims describe, then we conclude it's probably true, that it's probably good. But, I mean, in science, we don't just take someone as authority. We go, let me see the data. So that comment, I wouldn't disagree with it. It's a fair question to ask. Yeah.
And are you aware that these high levels of stress and actions done under high level of stress, that's acknowledged in the law, right?
Yes.
In other words, you know, a person acting under what might non-scientifically be referred to as an extreme heat of passion, that's something the law recognizes. So.
Yes.
Okay. So let's, if I could, just a few more questions and I'll sit down. Big picture. So when a person has a high stress situation and tells somebody what happened, tells a jury what happened, we should question it and doubt it. Doubt its efficacy. It may not be intentionally lying, but doubt its efficacy.
You're asking me my opinion. Yes. I think critical thinking is always important. I mean, that's what you do. You get to evaluate all the data. I don't know everything you know, so I believe that. I think you have to think critically about what you know and see what makes the most sense. Yeah.
And again, you said you were talking about, you know, maybe different things said in different statements might not itself be a lie, but you said other evidence of lying is great.
Yes. So the absence of evidence isn't evidence. So just because you don't see a sign of lying doesn't mean someone's not lying. But what I meant by that is that we actually tested him to look at malingering and lying in his psychological evaluation, and we don't have any evidence.
Other evidence in the case of lying is great.
Oh, I was just using it as an example. Yeah, you would want to find other data. In other words, if you're using alterations in memory as an argument for lying, that would be a misunderstanding of what we know about memory. My opinion is that you'd have to look for something else. But just the fact that memory is different or has holes or gaps is just what we know memory's like. So you can argue that it's a sign of lying, but it's different than what we know about memory. Oh, sorry. I get excited, sorry.
You use this, and others in your field like to use it. It's true that the brain is not like a camera, right? It
Correct.
doesn't work like a camera.
It does not.
But you know it does work like a camera? A camera. So, isn't it true that if we had potentially faulty memories that said, a guy's coming at me, but a camera that shows everything but he's trying to get away, don't believe the faulty memory, believe the camera.
You want to be critical of both, right? You want to make sure that...
Is your expertise in video technology?
No, but I've done misinformation with video. I've created false memories with videos because we look at that. What's the impact of a photograph on your memory and video? We've specifically done this in military folks. It's in the paper with the 900 people in it. You would want to critically evaluate the photograph or the movie to make sure that you believe it gives you a more valid view of what's going on. But I wouldn't assume that just because I've seen a photo that it's real. I mean...
But you would assume that there are problems with a person going on their memory, especially in a stressful situation.
I've testified that to many times. There are problems with human eyewitness memory. Yes.
Thank you, Doctor. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll have you go to the jury room since let's take a break.
I think I've discovered the dribble jug.
I guess I'll figure out these Charleston in-court consultations one of these days. It'll take about 5 minutes.